This is the Federal Mobility Policy Update with MariIa Zimmerman from MZ Strategies, Beth Osborne from Transportation for America, Martha Roskowski from the Mobility and Access Collaborative, and Darryl Young from the Summit Foundation. This week, as the Biden administration and Congress negotiates with moderate Democrats on what exactly should be the cuts to transportation infrastructure, we'll ask the basic question: how can philanthropy ensure that the money goes to where it's needed most? What are the resources that grassroots groups need to be able to influence federal and state decision-making? All that and more on this week's edition of the Federal Mobility Policy Update. How does the U.S. Department of Transportation work together to amplify that the money is going where it needs to go and to the people it needs to go to, so that we're not merely replicating more and more highways that are going to choke our planet? With us today to discuss that, to look over all of it, we have MariIa Zimmerman, who's with MZ Strategies. We've asked her here because she's looked at this issue from almost every angle, having worked both on the Hill as a staff person, having worked for the federal government, both at HUD and the Federal Transportation Administration, and as a consultant to philanthropy. So welcome, MariIa.
Thank you.
Similarly talented and knowledgeable, and as our regular panelist, Beth Osborne from Transportation for America. Good morning.
Good morning.
And my colleague with the Mobility and Access Collaborative, we have Martha Roskowski. Good morning, Martha.
Hello, everybody.
So speaking about how we spend the federal dollars, let's get some quick hits on what you need to know about what we need to look out for when those dollars start to arrive and how we can play a role in that. Let's start with Beth. Beth, what are your quick hits around dealing with DOT and making sure the dollars go where they need to go?
Yeah, we actually still have a lot of points of intervention to make sure we get the best results from the funds, even if the legislation setting them up didn't do what we wanted. There's things the administration can do and how they develop these programs. There are things that state departments of transportation can do to spend funding better. There are things that local governments can do to be prepared to take advantage of the funding. And there's opportunities to support people at the project level. But if we try to intervene only in one place, and especially the closer to the local level, the more we're playing a game of whack-a-mole and the more we're not really supporting people at the local level to win. My second quick hit is we also really need to think about reminding folks on Capitol Hill about the struggles at the local level to make sure this funding does good things for the community, because Congress often gets a pass because they don't pay attention to this until the next reauthorization. Great.
MariIa, your quick hits.
I would add to those great observations by Beth that I think we have an administration that is saying the right things and wants to do better in terms of getting better climate and equity goals, but it's not an industry nor an institution that really knows how to do that. And so I think there's a need both to help connect those state DOTs, MPOs, and localities that have been doing innovative work to new staff at DOT of this is how it's done and this is how you could make it easier for us to do it. That could include having USDOT provide better guidance on these types of strategies so they become more normal and not just the exception to the rule. I think there is similarly a huge need around technical assistance and sort of lifting up what we're learning from pilots. For instance, FTA has been funding the TOD pilot planning program now for 5 years. What have they learned from it? So I think there's lots of ways to kind of help grow that capacity and also recognize there's even just a real workforce capacity issue that states and localities are facing. And so what are ways that community-based organizations and others can partner with transportation agencies and cities to get better outcomes? And those are places that philanthropy and DOT could both lean in together on.
Great. So a lot to talk about here. We'll start with Beth kind of diving into those. I like the categories of opportunities, and let's help funders and others kind of get their heads around that. Because I know in talking with funders, there is interest in transportation, but also across all of the other pieces of government, looking at this unprecedented amount of money that's going to go out to states, out to localities, and can we how do we bend the curve and get better outcomes from the money? MariIa, I want to come back to your comments to dive a little bit deeper into the relationships between funders and USDOT, and what can we do? What are practical ways we might be able to strengthen that? Now that we have a USDOT that I think wants the same outcomes that a lot of people in philanthropy, that a lot of people in the communities are looking for. So Beth, you listed kind of 3 levels: administration, stuff we can do at the administration, state by state, and then whack-a-mole, which it seems like that's where we put a lot of our energy, is trying to stop bad projects when they're already in the pipeline. And we often lose because there's so much like institutional momentum. They're like zombies that just keep moving forward and nobody can stop them.
Yeah.
So Beth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to say we usually lose. We almost always lose. Yeah. We love to comfort ourselves with a handful of wins, but we conveniently forget how many times we set up those fighting at the local level to lose, to be martyrs to their cause. So we can't do that this time. We need to work with the administration to make sure that they don't just set up coordinating councils and they don't just set up working groups, but they actually write in to the regulations and notice of funding availability that they will put out for every single program some guideposts and some definitions and some approaches that will make it easier to do the right thing with that money. And look, they're going to be writing all these things anyway. We might as well get them to write all of this out, as much to the advantage of racial equity and addressing global climate change and improving public health and reducing fatalities as we can. And so my organization is working on a nice long list of those sorts of opportunities.
And I like that idea. How does that actually get actualized? Do folks actually write the language and deliver it to USDOT? Do we sit down with them? I mean, what are the really practical avenues for influencing, for making a difference here?
I mean, first we need to come up with all of the points of intervention that they have. I gotta say, implementing a reauthorization program is a lot of work. I'm sure MariIa has examples of doing that from FTA's perspective, but it is an overwhelming amount of work when it's a normal reauthorization and doesn't include tons of new programs and doesn't include all of this money. There will be incredible impetus to get out quickly. Add to the fact that they are not staffed. They are not staffed for normal times, forget what's coming, and they're going to need as much help as they can get to identify what they need to look out for, and for examples of language and approaches that they can insert into, whatever their action point is, a guidance or a rulemaking or a notice of funding.
And I think there are different ways than maybe DOT has done it before in its relationship with philanthropy. DOT, to my knowledge, hasn't really taken great advantage, for instance, of having positions funded on a temporary basis that philanthropy or other nonprofit organizations could come in and provide some of that short-term capacity support you're talking about, Beth. I know when I was
experts, or what they're called. Yeah.
When I was at HUD and we were dealing, with the stimulus funding at that time, we really took advantage of that, and we were able, through having some of that extra capacity, to do things like having listening tours, to having requests for information, and then draft proposals and things. It took extra time in the process, but it takes extra staff. And when you are running shorthanded, a big push to get the money out the door as soon as possible, it's easy to do what's expeditious, and that's usually not going to get you any better outcome than you've gotten for the last 30 years.
So are you talking about like 2 or 3 people? Are you talking about hundreds of people? I'm just trying to get a sense of scale of what it would be helpful.
It could be hundreds of people. You can staff up. There's budgetary limits. There's also management limits. You want to make sure that there's someone who actually can oversee their work and make sure that they're plugging into the right places. But Yeah, this is not something that is very common at DOT. And I often look jealously at other agencies that took better advantage of it. And especially considering the fact that the previous administration let positions just stay open for a very long time. Add to the fact that hiring in the federal government is just slow as molasses. And then the fact that we don't have a lot of confirmations means that there's still just there's openings at all levels. So there's tons of gaps they really need to fill.
So, but if we're talking, sorry, you go there.
So from a funder perspective, I know that previous experiences in working on the stimulus were problematic with the Sustainable Communities Program, in part because of the legal requirements that philanthropy is often not used to. They were helping to review process and proposals. Now, with the overlay of Justice 40 and the legitimate focus of philanthropy on issues of equity and inequality, what is the opportunity for us to play beyond just reviewing proposals? Would it be more efficient for us to resource a set of people who would provide technical assistance to the people who are applying for the dollars, for the institutions? How can we, rather than, because there are a lot of things that the federal government can do. We've had conversations with some people about this, and it feels like we don't want to be funding what the legal capacity that DOT has. We want to be funding things that they can't fund.
Right.
And in this instance, the interest is the grantees. It's not about resourcing DOT. Am I wrong about that?
I mean, other agencies get staff, like MariIa was saying, and that results in a program that's easier to connect to for the funders. What we do, or the funded community. So what we tend to do is set up an incredibly disadvantaged program, very hard to access program, and then try to intervene to make that miserable, hard program slightly more accessible to those that want to get in. That is the traditional model for DOT. What I would like to do is create programs where the people we're working with have some shot at winning in the first place, and that's actually where we're headed. And then when we go resource the grantees or the applicants, they're plugging into a system that's more set up for them to be successful. For example, the way you apply for competitive grant programs, particularly the program I ran, Tiger, that MariIa helped me with when I was at USDOT, was a miserable, expensive, laborious process. People would have to spend $50,000 to apply. Well, we could let them continue to do things like that and help people pay $50,000, or we could make the whole program easier to apply to so it doesn't cost $50,000 to apply, and we can focus on the projects and their implementation instead. And having people at DOT that could help work with the portal that you apply through to set it up for a different approach, that would be a huge help. Look, DOT does not have any shortage of people who want to review applications. That's the fun, glamorous stuff. What they don't have are the people who can set up the systems in the first place and help them define terms and find those points of leverage that can push the program more in the direction of being supportive for equity, for public health, for climate, for local economic development and things like that. And I know it's not glamorous, but that's where the game is won and lost.
Well, if I could chime in to also your question, Darryl, I think it's a both and. I think about environmental justice issues. DOT has never done a good job with environmental justice issues. They have the Title VI program, and like many federal agencies, that's usually approached through a litigious process that's way after the fact. And Title VI isn't about preventing harm. It's it's a very blunt, imperfect tool, but that's been the way it's been engaged. So think about the opportunity now when there's a renewed commitment to EJ issues by the White House. The administration is approaching it in more a cross-agency perspective, for philanthropy to even do something like working with DOT to fund a convening or some gathering to talk about what's needed around EJ and Title VI and moving it forward. Beth will probably say that's too ineffective, but I can tell you, like, they haven't really had that come to Jesus conversation about what it could look like and what if they really worked that through the MPO certification process, which is a mess, thinking about pilots, thinking about how it plays out, even as Beth is talking about, just to get in the front door, who's able to apply, what that burden. I mean, there's so many different ways it could layer out. And I think, philanthropy has been funding a lot of different work related to EJ around the country. And it, to me, would be a shame if we have an administration saying the right things. Look at those cats. And not able to really implement on the promise, because the default, as they're feeling overwhelmed with things, is just to kind of do what they've always done. And so that may be a staffing assistance to help the Civil Rights Office. It may be a convening, it may be supporting pilots, it may be technical assistance. And I think, you could say each funder will have a different piece of that it might want to fund, but having some comprehensive set of what are we trying to achieve with philanthropy and where do we really want to focus that, I think is much more effective than let's everyone, launch 1,000 ships and see which one makes it to the next port. So
that's a great analogy.
Yes, it is.
I really like that. So MariIa, is that really true that USDOT just has not really had the deep conversation about environmental justice?
I think it has nibbled at it. I think Secretary Fox, certainly was trying to look at this through the everyday counts measures and some things like that. But Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there has not been a conversation, again, opened up not just to state DOTs and an actual conversation with affected communities, hearing from Black, Brown, Indigenous communities about what's not working, what's needed. They have a lot of solutions, but a lot of times the discussion is, well, we'll talk to the 50 state DOTs, or we'll talk to the transit agencies. That's not where you're going to hear what's really needed for EJ communities. And again, at least my 2 times in 2 different administrations, it was often around that legal parameter, right? Like, here's what the law says, and here's how we're engaging, which, I would love to say when I was at HUD, well, don't tell me, what I can't do. Tell me what I can do. Like, how far can we take this to do that?
Yeah, I think it's also really different between transit and highways. And a lot of times with EJ, we talk about hearing from the community. But the problem is when the community steps up and says something other than I want a highway that will move my car really fast, there's nowhere for that feedback to go, because the program is set up to move cars really fast. So a lot of our outreach and engagement is set up to fail, because the only thing we're listening for and the only place there is to plug into is to build interstates, highways, sometimes at grade. So a lot of it is we have to set up these programs. So when an EJ community steps up and says, I need my people to be able to move safely within the community outside of a car, that has some place to go. Right. And so it really is the problem with EJ and NEPA and Title VI is the way it really works, and everyone kind of knows it, but we just don't say it out loud, is 1, we figure out how to move cars fast. 2, we figure out how to mitigate the damage to the things we pretend to care about, like EJ, civil rights, and the environment. But when they're set up as mitigations after you're 30% of the way through your engineering, come on, that is not a primary priority. That is how much do I have to pay people off so they don't sue me?
Yeah, it does feel like better guidance on how to do that would be really, really helpful. I'm working on a project with Colorado DOT, and they're really trying. It's performance measures, it's greenhouse gas budgets for transportation projects, and they are trying to do better community engagement. They've translated some of their materials into Spanish. They're providing translation at the meetings. I think they are still really struggling with how to actually do community engagement in a way that brings voices into a process at a point where you really can change the outcomes. of it, where you really can have a significant impact. Because like you say, Beth, with the highway expansion projects, it's NEPA that's driving it. And they're already, they've invested millions in starting to plan this project. And then there's a little interlude in the middle where it's like, oh, by the way, what do you all think of it?
Would you like to start over? Would you like to fill out all your work? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, look, okay.
So I'm wondering, I'm a recovering bureaucrat as well. And I'm wondering if we're looking at this too much from a bureaucratic mindset, and instead from a philanthropic hat, should we instead be saying, yes, we should help bureaucrats, but should we be resourcing community-based organizations? There's always that conversation, that tension between empowerment versus engagement. And should we funders be looking at empowering organizations to both have the technical expertise, but the political power to be able to insert themselves into a conversation in a productive way, and where necessary, a not productive way? Do you think that would help drive reform in dealing with state DOTs?
Yes.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to say yes, absolutely. But resourcing community groups to engage in processes is absolutely good. And I'm really happy to see that Philanthropy is taking that far more seriously. But we need to change the processes.
Yes.
Because if we're just giving them money to go beat their heads against a brick wall harder, more often, it's not the only thing we need to be doing. Okay, MariIa and Beth, you chime in on that too, because Darryl is.
Yes, I would completely agree with that, Martha. Of nothing is more frustrating for communities to get their hopes raised and then crash their head against the wall. But I even think with the funding community-based organizations, absolutely, philanthropy funding them is super important. But you can also have government funding community-based organizations. And this is something where I think philanthropy actually has a really powerful voice to government to say, it's not us alone who should be funding community-based organizations. When you partner and you engage and you create space and the expectation that you're going to be working with and listening and co-designing with community-based organizations, that's when you begin to see deeper systems and institutional change. I know in working with many different communities, some places would like to do that, and then their procurement staff say, oh no, we can't use, no federal funds can pass through to a community-based organization. That's bollocks. There are ways to do it. And so even to have philanthropy say, USDOT, it would be really helpful for our combined interests to have you clarify that yes, federal transportation funds can be used by a public agency to pass through and support community-based organizations to be involved in the process. And hey, for these discretionary grant programs, let's set in there an expectation that 10% of the funds or some percentage will be specifically to fund those groups to be part of the process, to be at the table and be co-designing.
So I really like this. I'm really intrigued by this idea of federal funds being able to support people to engage in processes to build really community-based projects, projects that the community actually wants and sees of benefit. I know I've heard from advocates there's concern that then they'll be bought, that they won't be free to really participate. But I think if there can be some guardrails around that work, it would be a really good use of public funds. And when you compare the billions that we're spending to widen highways, the amount of investment that you would need to do more authentic, more real community engagement up front, way at the front of the process, not 30% through, would be super valuable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And even where funding is not written in a way through legislation that allows it to go straight to some of those community groups, USDOT is perfectly capable of making it clear that they will be more likely to fund those grants that have those groups as part of their team. And they can certainly be sub-grantees. So there's a lot of opportunity that then sets the project up as a partnership. And a whole bunch of these programs are open for planning efforts that can allow that engagement. And then again, it's going to be important to set up the programs that prioritize the sorts of things we expect that engagement to call for. So if you set up a program and you're going to prioritize those projects that expand highways, well, what's the point in going and engaging the local community about how they want local economic development and walkability? And this is the problem in transportation. We go have endless meetings with the community about something we know the program does not allow us to address. And all that does is convince the public they want nothing to do with the agency. So it actually does active damage. And that's why setting up the program the right way matters. And I think funding the organizations that can be go-to thought leaders for the administration to help them formulate those programs, especially since they're understaffed, who can, with their own team of lawyers and economists, look for tweaks to some of those rules and places of leverage, will really help us to get it right. And then when we go empower those local communities, they're tapping into a program set up for them, as opposed to banging their head up against a wall over and over. And we're funding them so that they can repair their head as they go and bang some more.
Right. Okay. I think we need to wrap up. So before we get to our final little question, I want to ask you, what's the single thing, if you could talk to funders, which you can right now, what's the single thing they should be doing right now in the next month or two? What should they be getting their head around? What's the question that, we can bring back to funders to tackle? Who wants to go?
Single thing. That's so hard.
I know that's hard on a single thing. So I will say, and apologies if this is already happening, but I would encourage funders, if you haven't, you should be knocking on DOT's door and requesting to have a meeting and conversation, just like you do with HUD and you do with other agencies, of how can we better partner? Here's where our shared interests are aligned. Here's our ways that we could actually support you through some strategic partnerships around pilots, around technical assistance, around capacity building, and figure out what that pathway is together. It would really be a shame to have such an incredible group of people in this DOT and not have them feel like they have foundation support, philanthropy support for their work.
Yeah, that is a really good one. I think it'd be important to start getting a list of places you want to intervene. Which are the policies that are making it really hard now for our local partners to do what they want to do? Let's put together a little bit of a target list that we can share with DOT and say, these are the places that our partners get stopped and get messed up. So what can we do about them? I think that would help a lot. And I know you asked for one, but I just have to say, we have to plan for monitoring how this program actually plays out. We've been told all this great racial equity is going to come from a $1 billion program out of a $300 billion pot. When there are projects that undermine Black and brown communities, there needs to be a mechanism to take that back to all these people who have promised that it's going to be great and ask why it isn't. If we don't make space to do that, we will always be behind when these reauthorizations and these infrastructure efforts begin.
So it's a feedback. It's a feedback loop. It's an accountability loop that funders need to push for. And I heard what you said about sitting down and meeting with officials and the urgency of that. Martha, I know you're going to be doing some of that work, hopefully, tasked to do that. I'll let you close it out. Okay.
So first, I want to thank my guest stars, my rescue cats, Finch and Tree, for a little background cat fight. And I want to ask the group here a really important question: pumpkin spice or no?
No.
Solid no.
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 Cider donuts, yes.
Yeah, apple cider.
No.
Okay, we have it.
Unanimous.
It's like 4 out of 4. Pumpkin pies. I make really good pumpkin pies.
I do too.
Where it belongs. Okay.
Agreed. 4 out of 4 transportation geeks say.
That's
yeah.
right.
No.
Pumpkin spice, not so much.
Spice. Okay.
And we are going to say yes to having both of you back. And we want to thank you for joining us. If you like this broadcast and want more, follow up by liking it and subscribe. If you're a funder, as you know, we have the Mobility Collaborative, the access and the I'm bollocksing the name.
Mobility
Funders
and
Collaborative for
Access
Mobility and
Collaborative.
Access, which is part of the Funders Network. And we have the Mobility Fund, which will help to resource some of this. So we urge you to sign up for that if you're a funder. If you're not a funder, keep reaching out to us and letting us know what needs to happen, because we want to be responsive and respect all of your collective knowledge. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.